Right, hello students. Welcome back to Cognitive Psychology video lecture brought by Ms. Satwika. And today we will talk about perception, one of cognitive processes that also usually seems easy, but it is created by complex processes that often operate without your awareness. So before moving forward, here is the list of topics that we will discuss in this video. And all of these topics has the objective to answer following question of first, why can two people experience different perception in response to the same stimulus? And also the question of how does perception depend on a person's knowledge about characteristic of the environment? And the third one is how does the brain become tuned to respond best to things that are likely to appear in the environment? And lastly, we want to also answer what is the connection between perception and action. All right, so let's begin with definition. So perception is defined as experiences resulting from stimulation of the senses. Thus, the goal of this video or chapter about perception is to explain the mechanism responsible for perception. To gain understanding about perception process, let's take a look at this vignette. So here's a girl named Crystal. She is running along the beach in the early morning, and while she's running, she looks down the beach and notices something about 100 meters away that was not there yesterday in these A pictures. Right? At first, she thought that it is a driftwood. It is difficult to see because early morning, because of the mist and the dim light. But as she approaches the object, she begins to doubt her initial perception. And just as she is wondering whether it might not be driftwood, she realizes that it is, in fact, the old beach umbrella that was lying under the lifeguard stand yesterday. And continuing down the beach, then she passes some coiled rope that appears to be abandoned. So she stops to check it out, grabbing one end, and she flips the rope and sees that it is continuous strand, but she needs to keep running because she's supposed to meet a friend at the coffee shop far down the beach. And later, sitting in the coffee house, she tells her friend about the pieces of magic driftwood that was transformed into an umbrella. So Crystal's experiences illustrate a number of things about perception. So the first one, her experience of seeing what she thought was driftwood turn into an umbrella illustrates how perception can change based on added information. So Crystal's view became better as she got closer to the umbrella, right? And how perception can involve a process similar to reasoning or problem solving. So Crystal figured out what the object was based partially on remembering having seen in the umbrella the day before, right? And based on her past experiences as well. And next, Crystal's experience also demonstrate how arriving at a perception can involve a process. It took some time for Crystal to realize that what she thought was driftwood was actually an umbrella. So it is possible to describe her perception as involving a reasoning process there, right? And in most cases, perception occurs so rapidly and effortlessly that it appears to be automatic. But as we will see later in this video lecture, perception is far from automatic. It involves complex and usually invisible processes that resemble reasoning. And the next characteristic of perception shown as Crystal's guess that the coiled rope was continuous, it illustrates how perception can be based on a perception rule. So when object is overlapping, then the one underneath usually continues behind the one on top. So that's a perceptual rule that we'll also discuss in this video. And the last one, crystal experience also illustrates how perception occurs in conjunction with action. Crystal is running and then perceiving at the same time, right? And later at the coffee shop, she easily reaches for her cup of coffee. It's a process that involves coordination of seeing the coffee cup, determining its location, physically reaching for it, and grasping its handle. So this aspect of crystal experiences is what happens in everyday perception. So it is central to our ability to organize the action that occur as we interact with the environment. So it is important to recognize that while perception creates a picture of our environment and help us take action with it, it is also plays a central role cognition in general. So when we consider that perception is essential for creating memories, acquiring knowledge, solving problem, communicating with other people, recognizing someone you met last week, answering question on cognitive psychology exam, for example, it becomes clear that perception is gateway to all the other cognition we will be describing in this video lecture. And before moving further, can you distinguish sensation and from perception? So basically, sensation is the input about the physical world obtained by our sensory receptors. All right, and then perception is actually the process by which the brain selects, organizes, and interprets this sensation. In other words, senses are the physiological basis of perception. And then moving on to information for human perception, we will offer a few types of processing. And the first one is bottom-up processing. So perception is built on a foundation of information from the environment, right? And looking at something creates an image on our retina. And this image then generates electrical signals that are transmitted through the retina and then to the visual receiving area of the brain. And this sequence of events from the eye to the brain is called bottom-up processing because it starts at the bottom or the beginning of the system, which is the eye, when the environmental energy stimulates the receptor. But perception involves information in addition to the foundation provided by the activation of the receptors and bottom-up processing. Perception is also involved factors such as person knowledge of the environment and the expectation people bring to the perceptual situation. For example, remember Palmer's experiments that I've described in our first class, which show that people identify a rapidly flashed object in a kitchen scene more accurately when that object fits the scene. All right, so this in this picture it would be the bread because it fits with the kitchen. So this knowledge we have of the environment is the basis of top-down processing. So it is a processing that originates in the brain at the top of the perceptual system instead of the bottom. All right, so it is this knowledge that enables people to rapidly identify objects and scenes and also to go beyond mere identification of objects to determining the story behind the scene. Now we will consider two additional examples of top-down processing, which are perceiving objects and hearing words in the sentence. So an example of top-down processing illustrated in this figure, it's called the multiple personalities of a blob. So because even though all of the blobs here are identical, it blurred pictures, right? But they are perceived as different objects depending on their orientation and the context within which they are seen. So the blob here appears to be an object on a table in the B picture here. Perhaps it's drinking, it's a water bottle or something like that, right? And the blob here on the C figure is a shoe on a person bending down in. Probably, most probably in a supermarket, right? Okay, and then this, the picture or the figure D here, the blob perceived as a car and a person crossing the street. So we perceive the blob as different objects because of our knowledge of the kinds of objects that are likely to be found in different types of the scenes. So the human advantage over computer is therefore due in part to the additional top-down knowledge available to human here. So an example of how top-down processing, another example of top-down processing can be found from influences speech, yeah. So speech perception occurs for a person as probably like sit in a restaurant listening to people speaking in different language, for example, like Spanish language at the next table. So unfortunately, that person don't understand what the other people saying because they don't understand Spanish. To the person that doesn't understand Spanish, the dialogue sounds like an unbroken string of sound, yeah, except for occasional pauses when a familiar word like gracias pops out from the person talking Spanish. And the person perception reflect the fact that the physical sound signal for speech is generally continuous. And when there are breaks in the sound, they do not necessarily occur between words. As you can see in this figure, by comparing the place where each word in this sentence begin with the pattern of the sound signal. So the ability to tell when one word in a conversation ends and the next one begins is a phenomenon called speech segmentation. Yeah, the fact that a listener that familiar only with English or Indonesian language and another listener that familiar with Spanish language can receive identical sound stimuli but experience different perception means that each listener experience with language or lack of the experience of language. So that influencing his or her perception, right? And the continuous sound signals enter the ears and trigger signals that are sent toward the speech area of the brain. So it is a bottom-up processing. But then if a listener understands the language, their knowledge of the language create the perception of individual words, which is the top-down processing. So while this segmentation is aided by knowing the meanings of words, listeners also use other information to achieve this kind of segmentation. As we learn a language, we're learning more than the meaning of the words, right? And without even realizing it, we are learning transitional probabilities. It's the likelihood that one sound will follow another within a word. All right, so this is the end of perception video lecture part 1, and I will see you shortly in the next second part of the video. Thank you and stay tuned.